confrontation with the West. A sitting African head of state has officially accused France of financing an attack on his country's main international airport. In a national address, Niger's military leader, General Abdourahamane Tchiani, has declared that the West is no longer fighting terrorism in Africa. It is actively fighting the Sahel itself.
The whole European Union, all of Europe, the entire West that contributes, that participates in raising the funds to wage these wars in Niger, Mali, and Burkina. Do you think I am saying this merely out of a desire to speak ill of others? These are facts.
According to Tchiani, the June 18th attack on Niamey's Abdourahamane International Airport was not a random act of terror. He alleged that terrorists from the al-Qaeda-affiliated group Janum received explicit orders from French intelligence to burn the international airport to the ground, while simultaneously striking the presidential palace and a national intelligence center.
Right, welcome to This Week in Africa. The AES is reclaiming its power. Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger stand up to the West. We will start with introductions before we get into today's stories. I'll turn it over with my co-host before I introduce myself.
Hello, everyone. My name is Gloria Ayo, founder and host at the Diaspora Station and co-host with the Joe Hotagwa on This Week in Africa. Very happy to be back.
And I am Joe Hotagwa, founder of Authentic African Media. We help people visit, move, and invest in Africa. And we share the news of the day so you know what's happening on the ground before you do one of those three things. Before we get into today's first story, I just want to kind of give you guys a rundown of what we're covering today. We are covering, of course, Niger, explicitly calling out France and other Western powers for their involvement in these guerrilla groups and the attacks on the AES. We also have a story coming out of the AES about the attempt to reshape the global narrative and host the 2032 Africa Cup of Nations in the AES. We have some stories for Trump's immigration. South Africa is taking on one of Trump's most controversial policies, and also the U.S. Department of Homeland Security issues a fine for illegal migrants in the United States. We will then talk about Zimbabwe's first plant to process clean energy. And then lastly, if we have time, we will talk about Nigeria-South Africa relations. Before we get to the rest of the stories, let's get back into today's story. As mentioned, Niger's leader, Tchiani, accuses France of supporting an attack on Niamey's main international airport, claiming that the West is waging a broader campaign against the Sahel. While the allegations have not been independently verified, France, of course, denies interfering in Niger's affairs. The accusations highlight a much deeper geopolitical struggle. As Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso move further away from the Western influence, the alliance of Sahelian states is reshaping its security, economic, and diplomatic ties. From expelling French forces to strengthening links with Russia, the region is entering a new era of strategic competition. At the same time, France is developing stronger relationships around other countries on the continent of Africa, namely Kenya, Nigeria, Ghana, and others. So with that, we will get back into this video, share the rest of the story, and we will have some more commentary on the other side.
To believe that those who came to the airport are terrorists fighting for a cause is to be extremely naive. It is France that financed, and we have evidence the airport will be attacked because France's survival is what is at stake. Emmanuel Macron once said, and I quote him, that he will not leave office with his tail between his legs before departing. He will settle scores with the putschists of Niger first, then those of the Sahel, namely Assimi Goïta and Ibrahim Traoré.
None of these claims have been independently verified. France has repeatedly denied supporting armed groups or interfering in Niger's internal affairs. But this story is bigger than one speech, and it is bigger than attacks on an airport. For landlocked Niger, the Diori Hamani is far more than a transport hub. It is the country's main gateway to the world, a strategic military hub, and a critical piece of state infrastructure. So an attack there isn't just an attack on a building. It is an attack on the state itself. But perhaps the biggest shift wasn't that Tchiani accused France of the doing. It was how he described the conflict. Throughout his address, he barely spoke about terrorism. Instead, he described the Sahel as the front line of what he called a war of neocolonialization.
All right, we will leave it there. But Gloria, your thoughts on Tchiani explicitly calling out France and the West in this way? I think previously it had been inferred. I think it had been spoken about by Russian authorities, but this may be the first time in an address like this that that Niger has come out and specifically named France as their accuser of this attack.
Yeah, and even though it's been inferences in the past, one thing has been consistent. Leaders of the AES have been saying the same thing. Pan-Africanists, I'm talking about true Pan-Africanists, Macron, Pan-Africanists throughout Africa have been saying the same thing. What France has done in response has been to deny the allegations. Like, of course, that's what you're going to do. But you spend far more energy trying to build relations in other parts of Africa than actually giving us proof that you're not, in fact, doing that, because that is really awful PR. And I expect that since you're such a Pan-Africanist, Emmanuel Macron, that you would want to prove to the people of Africa at the very least that, hey, prove to us that these things aren't true. These allegations have been going on for years. And in the midst of all the allegations, you still have countries like America courting the AES. So again, as we've said time and time again, when you look at the history of Africa, when it comes to France-Africa relations throughout history, it's not been positive. It's never been in the interest of the people. It's largely been in the interest of France. France never did anything for Africa because they just wanted to benefit the people of Africa. At the end of the day, even if they were doing things that looked like, oh, they're building infrastructure, whatever it is, largely it was for their own benefits. So now when you look at Niger has been a major supplier of uranium to France. And since the AES kicked France out, we've seen what has happened to France's economy. So there's a lot of desperation there, and that explains their going to other parts of Africa, Eastern Africa, etc., to court these leaders. You know, they're friends with even the Nigerian president. They're doing things to move to, because they know what is under the ground. They know the resources that Africa has. And again, without Africa, there's no France. That's just the proof there. And one thing I do appreciate, I heard the reference to the AES being the front line when it comes to Africans nationalizing their own assets, their own resources. When it comes to Africans fighting for their own sovereignty, you cannot deny that the AES is actually at the forefront of this, and that is why a lot of people throughout the world are rallying behind them.
100%. I don't even have much to add there. I think it just accept the fact that it does seem that the stances are getting bolder and more explicit in terms of who is to blame for these attacks. I think that there's been, as you mentioned, there had been inferences previously, and it had been communicated in broader terms about what they said was France and or the EU meddling in AES affairs. And of course, there had been other leaders in Russia in particular who had named France. But to see the specific naming of France and calling out the broader EU in this specific attack does seem to be new. And it does feel like they feel strongly enough about the evidence that they have in order to say that this was France in particular. So, we will keep an eye on this story and others as we go along, because this one is one that we, are going to want to keep you guys all updated on. Next, we move to another story in the Sahel, and this is really technically a more positive story. And this is just around sports and AFCON. For those of you who are unfamiliar with AFCON, that's Africa Cup of Nations. And it is a big deal in Africa. It is it is almost like the World Cup, but in Africa, right? So it's basically, the best of African teams compete to become the Africa Cup winner. You might remember the last Africa Cup ended in controversy, where Senegal actually won, but 3 months later, after an appeal, Morocco got the win. And, we're not going to go back through the story there. If you guys want to know more about what happened there, you can watch the older live stream that we did, where we spoke about this in detail on probably two live streams in a row when we were talking through all the details there. So you can check that out. But in the meantime, what is happening now is that Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger are launching a historic Sahel bid for AFCON 2032. So basically, First Post is explaining how the three countries, which is now a confederation, are attempting to reshape the global narrative around the Sahel with a joint bid to host the Africa Cup of Nations. So after years of being associated with what people were calling coups, we call revolutions. Other people talk about what they're calling terrorism, and some people say regional instability. The three Alliance of Sahelian States members are using football as a tool of diplomacy, unity, and international legitimacy. While CAF has accepted the declaration of interest, the road to hosting AFCON 2032 remains challenging. With infrastructure, finance, and security all under scrutiny, can the Sahel convince Africa that it is ready to stage the continent's biggest football tournament, or will ongoing security concerns stand in their way? So First Post has the reporting on this. We will hear a little bit from them and have some commentary on the other side.
For years, the world has seen Sahel as a region defined by coups, terrorism, and international isolation. Now, three military-led governments want it to be known for something else. Not the sound of gunfire, but the roar of Africa's biggest football tournament, the Africa Cup of Nations. The Confederation of African Football, CAF, has accepted the joint declaration of interest from Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger to bid for AFCON 2032. It is the first major step in what could become the most ambitious regional project the Alliance of Sahel States has attempted since its creation. But CAF's decision does not mean the tournament has been awarded. The three Sahel countries must now compete against other bidders. CAF says the final decision will be based on technical requirements, including infrastructure, finance, and security.
Burkina Faso, Niger, and Mali will have as good a chance as everybody else. They are not going to be disadvantaged or prejudiced by the fact that they're military juntas. But you raise a very important point. The questions of safety and security, and those are questions that we will have to address. But there's no decision that has been taken as to where it will go.
All right, the video is much longer, but we'll leave it there. Gloria, your thoughts on the AES's bid to host the AFCON, Africa Cup of Nations?
Yeah, I love the audacity. Yeah, why not? And obviously, they know a lot of Africans are going to rally around the AES. Why not the AES? AFCON has had questionable outcomes. You know, like the reference you made to the very last AFCON with Senegal winning, and then we know what happened a couple of months later with Morocco being given the trophy, etc. So there have also been questions around, how AFCON has approached certain football teams, certain nations. There are a lot of allegations out there. Even with the World Cup that just got concluded, there are a lot of people who have called out the AFCON leaders and asked them why they've been silent. When it came to certain things that were happening, Africans being banned or being disallowed to attend the World Cup, etc., we didn't hear any of their voices. So the reason the Sahel, and I'm glad that he did point out, Mosepe did point out that they will be given a fair chance. Yeah, again, why not? But the reason any country in the Sahel hosting the World Cup, or rather AFCON, is important is the fact that we're also looking for equity, even in sports, right? We saw with the turnout, the way the world received the World Cup, there's a lot of potential in sports. And that is one area that unfortunately hasn't been given the attention it deserves on the continent, not even by AFCON. So to have countries that are neutral, as far as we know, that are neutral and can host and can ensure that they're able to, at least to some extent, control certain aspects of AFCON. Because if you're hosting, I guess you do have some kind of influence, and we know the Sahel absolutely does. So I would be very surprised if they get that approval, but I hope they do. I would be very surprised if they do. I mean, they did allow them to cast their bid, etc. But hopefully, because when you go to the Sahel, now we're talking sports. So the hope is for that to actually be allowed. Again, why not? Why not the Sahel?
Yeah, I mean, there have been numbers of diaspora visiting the Sahel in groups and with zero reports of insecurity or issues. So it'd be interesting to see. I do wonder because, there's two things can be true, right? The government of Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso have all blamed Western powers for their interference with some of these groups in country. And so I do think that there could be a legitimate fear that this would be an opportunity, if what they are alleging is true, for them to be able to utilize an event like this to further their messaging against the AES. Mm-hmm. And so if CAF is thinking about security, that might be one of the reasons why they would not move forward. And so we'll have to see. We'll have to see. I mean, I'm interested to see if it's considered. This is 2032, so we are talking, at least 6 years away from now. So there'll be another AFCON, at least one AFCON happening between now and then. And there's plenty of time to see what will happen. Now, I don't know how long before the actual event itself the decisions are made. So we'll have to see, what changes can happen between now and then for, for the CAF group to make a determination. But we'll keep an eye on this and we'll let you know. Real quick, I want to shout out Jada for sending a donation. Shout out to Jada. She said YouTube won't let her mention or send a super chat mentioning the word for the robotic future. I presume that's AI. But we appreciate you for supporting the channel. Okay, so let's get into the next story. And so that is with South Africa urging the U.S. government to reverse the U.S. Afrikaner refugee executive order. So some background here coming from First Post reporting. South Africa is taking one of Donald Trump's most controversial policies, the Afrikaner refugee program. Is taking on one of Donald Trump's most controversial policies, the Afrikaner refugee program. So Pretoria has sent veteran diplomat Rolf Meyer to Washington with a difficult mission. And his mission is to convince the Trump administration to cancel the executive order that created a special refugee pathway for specifically white Afrikaners in South Africa. The dispute has reopened a deeper battle over land reform, minority rights, crime, and the future of U.S.-South Africa relations. So we're going to hear from the folks at First Post, and then we will have some commentary on the other side.
South Africa is asking Donald Trump for something few world leaders ever do, to cancel his own executive order. The target is the controversial Afrikaner refugee program. But reversing a policy created by Donald Trump may be Pretoria's hardest diplomatic assignment yet. And the outcome could help to shape the future of relations between the two countries. South Africa's new ambassador to the United States, Rolf Meyer, says that he is working to convince President Donald Trump to revoke the executive order. It was signed in February of 2025. The order created a dedicated refugee pathway for Afrikaners after the White House claimed they faced racial persecution in South Africa. Speaking to a South African radio station, Meyer admitted persuading President Trump to reverse the policy would be extremely difficult.
We'll leave it there, but I just see the irony in an Afrikaner telling Trump that the Afrikaners are not being genocided because former Afrikaner said they were, in Elon Musk. It's just the irony in all of that. Your thoughts on this mission of South Africa to have the South African Afrikaner quote-unquote refugees returned to South Africa?
Yeah, so many ironies. I just never thought that the world would come to a time when you see stories like this where white folks are claiming racial persecution, and people going to Washington to talk to Trump or lobby Trump and his government, or however you want to phrase it, is actually a very interesting thing. Everyone just going to this man. My country did it. The government of Nigeria did it. Just going there, in the interest of image, because they understand the influence that Trump has over opinions, etc. Honestly, Joe, that's all I have to add to the conversation. Obviously, we've talked about this time and time again. We know that there is no such thing happening in South Africa, regardless of how we feel about what's going on over there. We do know that that's absolutely never happened. It's never been a thing. Crime affects everyone, black, white, everyone in South Africa. So obviously that was a reach, and I would have expected the government to act. You know what I mean? Like, you stand on your sovereignty. I don't need to. They say a lot of things about the AES all the time. You don't see them going to Washington to try to change their opinions so that they can improve relations. They need you more than you need them. But again, our governments don't know what we have. So here we are.
Yeah, and I think, and one thing I will add there is that I think that it's very clear, right? If you have a longtime political appointee in South Africa who happens to be an Afrikaner himself of Dutch descent, who is the ambassador to the United States, going and speaking to the White House about the fact that they should reverse the refugee program, it just shows that there isn't the genocide actually happening in South Africa. You have a representative from that group that is telling you to reverse it. Now, I'm of two minds on this one, right? Because, obviously that group is a voting bloc that can continue to vote for the Democratic Alliance in South Africa. And that continues to give the Democratic Alliance, which is a majority Afrikaner, Dutch descendant political group in South Africa. And that is probably the second most powerful political party in South Africa. And they are in the unity government with Ramaphosa's party, the former party of Nelson Mandela, which name is escaping me right now because I haven't had much sleep. The ANC. And so with that, I actually, thought it was interesting because, one, you have now an understanding of what refugees go through when they come to the United States, because the American media has started to cover the complaints because it was people of European descent complaining about the refugee program. So they did shine a light on the refugee program in the United States. So for that, I'm grateful, even if it's for all the wrong reasons. Two, it has ushered out a lot of folks that are part of a voting bloc that would be likely voting for the Democratic Alliance to continue to keep them in power or close to power. And that's probably why they're sending someone of Afrikaner descent to try to bring them back. Because, the less they have them there, the less people they have to vote, and the further and further they move away from potential power. And so I'm of the opinion that, I'd love for them to stay in America. They decided to take America up on this offer. I'd like to see how they fare here in the United States and then also to lessen the size of that voting bloc in South Africa. So that's my viewpoint here. And I don't know if that's even controversial, but that to me, I think it's the best possible outcome in my opinion. Shout out to Jada. She had a note too. Our government do know what we have. They plan on digging up and splitting the profits with foreign instead of with our peoples. There you go. And shout out to Jada for another support, super chat. So with that, we will now, we are low on time, so we'll do one last story. Won't get a chance to talk about Tinubu and his potential snubbing of South Africa, Tinubu being the president of Nigeria. But we will quickly, actually, we will talk about it. We just won't play a video. So we'll talk about Zimbabwe first, opening its first lithium processing plant. Quickly, we'll respond to that, and then we'll also talk about South Africa, but we won't play the video on that. So Zimbabwe's first plant to process clean energy metal lithium, of which it's Africa's top producer. So lithium is the number one producer of lithium in Africa is Zimbabwe, and they are now launching its first plant to process clean energy metal lithium. It's up and running, and a milestone that is expanding the drive to stop wholesale export of raw materials and wealth. So basically starting to do the process of refining on continent before it leaves the continent, which is something that we have been talking about for a while on this platform and through these live streams. Do you have any thoughts on Zimbabwe obviously launching this first plant to process clean energy? And this story came from African News. Since we don't get a chance to actually watch the video, I do want to shout them out for reporting on this. But your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's basically what we want. I think about trade, not aid. And in as much as, the way the whole aid situation was handled, we didn't care for the process with which it was handled. I do hope that governments are forced to go back to the drawing board and learn steps towards sovereignty. The Sahel does it all the time. So we have, as Jada rightly pointed out, the governments do know what we have. Thank you for that, Jada. They do know what we have. But now we want, in you now standing on our sovereignty, we want the people to also benefit from that. So I'm curious and I'm interested in knowing how this develops. I want to see that reflect in the lives of the Zimbabweans. You're there to serve the people, so hopefully that reflects in their lives.
Yes, that is the hope. And I'll just say, look, we, as mentioned before, this has been what we've been wanting to see for a long time, right? We've reported on Dangote opening up a refinery in Nigeria. Nigeria also opening a state-sponsored refinery. I mentioned that maybe 2.5 years ago. And so, then there was a conversation about Dangote opening up a refinery in Kenya and working through that process and all the challenges to untangle all the relationships with Europe to be able to begin to export and process it and throughout the continent, throughout the eastern part of the continent. So this is just another example of us moving in the right direction. But to your point, in the right direction in terms of refining our own minerals, hopefully in the right direction in terms of the profits benefiting the people of the country in which the minerals are being pulled from. Okay, last and final story before we go to your country, Nigeria, and 12.5% of mine, I guess. 12.5% of my DNA. A first post actually explains how Nigeria's Tinubu reportedly snubbed South Africa amid the xenophobia row, diplomatic tensions across West Africa and Southern Africa reached a boiling point as Nigeria President Bola Tinubu reportedly declined to meet with South Africa's special envoy, Roland Lamola. So, sent by President Cyril Ramaphosa to repair ties, the delegation was instead redirected to Nigeria's Minister of State for Foreign Affairs, Ambassador, Sola. I'll just say his first name. Sola. And so the symbolic snub underscores growing anger in Abuja and Accra over deadly anti-immigrant violence targeting African immigrants in South Africa. Now, I did report on Monday that President of Ghana, John Mahama, did meet with that same envoy in Accra, Ghana, behind closed doors, and urged the United Nations to get involved. But your thoughts on apparently Tinubu deciding not to meet with the envoy, but instead having someone else meet with them?
Maybe he was busy, I don't know. But anyway, that could have also been an opportunity. Let's have the conversation. I think it's okay to have the conversation. I don't understand the message that was being sent, but I would have loved to see an opportunity for, let's talk. Like, we've had conversations, but you can never have enough, as this is an ongoing issue. But anyway, yeah, I understand, again, the messaging behind it, but I would have loved the opportunity to see more open conversations around this issue.
Yes, I do think, it would have been nice for the head of state to have that conversation. And I know that there had been conversations about the fact that Ramaphosa had attempted to make those meetings happen, and he specifically was snubbed. So he sent someone who reports to him. And so in many cases, that happens with other presidents, right? If you send a special envoy, the special envoy might meet with another grouping, Minister of International Affairs, et cetera, whatever that group might look like. Foreign minister, I guess, is what usually called. Yeah, I mean, what I saw with Mahama in terms of what he stated his instructions were to that envoy and how he approached it, it would have been nice for that to be reinforced in Ghana as well. But I think that would mean that Ghana and Nigeria would have communicated jointly about how they wanted to approach these conversations with South Africa, which does not seem to have happened. So that's probably more what I would have wanted to see, is a joint effort between these two nations to communicate how they want to communicate with South Africa in solidarity, and then also take that communication to the United Nations for a larger group to weigh in. The United Nations. The African Union. If I said United Nations, I meant the African Union, because that is what the African Union is meant to be there for, not to threaten the AES, which is what has happened in the past. And so those are my thoughts on this particular conversation. I do think at this point it's time to have these conversations, probably not in front of press, definitely behind closed doors, so that there can actually be some progress made. I do think if they do have this meeting in front of the press, it would just lead to more challenges with their own internal public within each country. And so it probably made sense that the way John Mahama did it in Ghana, it seems like a version of that happened in Nigeria. Just interested to hear what that conversation was like, and if they followed in the footsteps of what Mahama did on his trip, on his meeting earlier in the week. All right. We seem to have a few people joining here, and we appreciate you all joining. If you're interested in the stories that you're hearing as you've just joined, go back and watch this from the beginning. We are live every Thursday for This Week in Africa, every Monday for either Pan-African Perspectives on one Monday, and then the following Monday, This Week in Ghana. And then every other Sunday, as of right now, we are doing This Week in Sierra Leone. So we will be planning to do more. Stay tuned. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell, so you're notified every time a new video comes out. Make sure you follow Gloria Ayo across all platforms and Diaspora Station across all platforms. And I'll be remiss if I did not mention, today is the last day to enter the contest to be able to earn a free trip to Ghana. You want to go to ito.authenticafrican.com for the link and you will be directed for how you can enter. Today is the last day. We will be doing a trip at the end of the year, and I will be there to meet those people in person. With that, thanks for watching. We'll see you guys all soon. Bye, guys.